Okay, so we've talked about aggregate supply, we've talked about aggregate demand. Now let's put it all together. So, when we put short run aggregate supply, aggregate demand, price level, and then some quantity of real GDP, that's what we have. Okay, and that's essentially a picture of a short run economy. And again, without going into too much detail, as you recall, short run doesn't mean there's not a unit associated with that. Doesn't mean we don't measure short run in days or weeks or something like that. Short run is a moment in time, so it's a snapshot. So at any given moment, this represents a short run economy, and this represents some quantity of real GDP that economy is able to produce, right? So. And of course, we talked a little bit about what shifts these around. You can go ahead and review your notes, review the textbook and again, be sure you know that for exam 2, be able to understand what shifts those around. But that's a picture of a short run economy. Now the question is, how's that economy doing? Well, we don't know. It's a trick question, right? Because we know the amount of output the economy is producing, but we're missing a third component, right? We're missing the long run aggregate supply, which is really the potential or the target. So if we said that the long run was like that, then in fact, that's an economy that's in equilibrium, right? Because the amount of GDP that's being produced in the short run is equal to the full employment GDP that's anticipated in the long run to be the potential of the economy. So essentially, the short run economy, right, is producing what it should at the long run potential GDP. And sometimes I get the question is that real? As we talked about in class, yeah, it is real. You can go back and we'll show you later on other graphs, and have shown you other graphs that show the economy in equilibrium. What about this condition, though? What about a situation where the long run is like this? So what's going on there? Okay, well here, the short run economy is, we'll call that S for short run, is producing a level of GDP that's greater than the potential in the long run, right? And so there's a gap. There's a gap right here between what's being produced in the short run, which is a greater amount than the long run potential at full employment. And that gap right there is referred to in this instance as an inflationary. See how I did that? See how I didn't leave myself enough room? An inflationary gap, right? The economy in the short run is superheated. It's producing more than it should. What about a situation like this? What happens if our long run is over on this side, right? Now, the short run economy is producing a level of GDP that's less than the potential in the long run here. And we still have a gap, but this time it's a recessionary gap. Right? And that kind of makes sense because the economy in this case is lagging somewhat and not producing a level of GDP that it should and be able to produce in the long run. So those three conditions, equilibrium, here, I'll draw them. So there's three conditions the economy can be in, right? They could either be in equilibrium, or it would be in a recessionary gap, producing less than the potential, or an inflationary gap where it's producing a greater amount. And be sure you understand those three conditions going into exam 2.